Hey guys, this lovely manhwa is titled Becoming a Family with the Duke and His Son Part 2. In the Adelhard estate, the previous duke had a daughter, known as the first daughter and Cassus' elder sister. Her name is banned within the Adelhard estate for a reason unknown. Julia Adelhard was a beautiful lady of House Adelhard. She was the only person who reached out to Cassus when he suffered under the brutal hand of their father. Julia made him feel the presence of a genuinely loving family member, and she was, quite literally, the only family Cassus had ever known. Time flew, and the two siblings entered different academies. Cassus was relieved, because finally, his sister would also get away from their father's clutches. But after a while, Cassus found out that the abuse had continued, and this time, the Duke was hurting her because she was pregnant. And not only that, the baby didn't have a father. Cassus, who knew the truth, did his best to protect his sister from their tyrant father. Julia was grateful to her brother for protecting her and her son. Julia passed away during childbirth. Cassus was afraid that she would be ridiculed after death for having a bastard child, so he decided to take the blame by raising her son as his own successor. Cassus had given up trying to find Lucius's real father until a year ago. Lucius fell ill, and the physician confirmed that he was suffering from seizures. Cassus was surprised to hear this because he had never had one before. He asked about the rune on Lucius's body, and he was told that it didn't seem like an illness, but rather a curse. Cassus was confused and kept asking questions. The physician explained that it was from birth, but strangely, the rune hadn't shown up until now and it seemed to be hereditary. At times, countless thoughts ran through his mind. He had sleepless nights, researching to see if he could find anything relating to Lucius's biological father, but he found nothing until Count Barnian came over and spoke about knowing Lucius's real father. Cassus tried to pretend he didn't know what he was talking about, but before he could say anything, the Count had already revealed the identity of the child's mother, and it was none other than his sister. Count Barnian lifted up a letter, saying he had the name of the platinum-haired father written on the paper. That was how the Count made his proposal to the Duke. If Cassus were to refuse, then he'd tell the world what he knew. Seeing the Duke, Ibelia knew he'd be bothered about this meeting with Lucius, because she had tried to take advantage of the information she knew to break off the engagement. Lucius spoke out immediately, telling his father that Lady Barnian had nothing to do with this. He was the one who insisted on having tea with her. Cassus ordered him to go back to his quarters. Lucius tried to argue, wearing a pitiful expression, but Ibelia asked him to head back, just like his father had said, because she wanted to discuss something with the Duke. Lucius had no choice but to leave. Cassus asked her lady why she didn't inform him about her arrival, and she replied that she ran into the young master on the streets, and he asked her to join him for tea, so she accepted his offer. "It seems I've offended you, Your Grace, but I'll be taking my leave," she said, rising. But as she stood, her sleeve slid up, and Cassus noticed a bruise on her wrist. He was shocked. He grabbed her immediately, raising her hand and asking with a serious expression, "Who did this to you? Was it Count Barnian?" Ibelia's expression saddened, and she told him it wasn't what he was thinking. The Duke asked if it was her two stepbrothers. She told him it was none of his business, since they were about to break off their engagement. He said he was concerned because they hadn't broken off the engagement yet, which meant she was still his fiancée, and as her fiancé, he had the right to know what was going on. She thought to herself that he was lying. He had never regarded her as his fiancée. She spoke up, lying to him that she had tripped and fallen down the stairs. "Are you satisfied now? Please let me go," she said. He couldn't argue any further and decided to have her carriage prepared. Cassus wasn't pleased with the wound he saw on the lady's wrist, so he called his assistant and ordered him to look into Lady Barnian's family and bring him information about how she was being treated, because the wound on her wrist seemed like a sign of abuse. He thought to himself, if my assumption is true, then I'll have to do something about it. Inside the carriage Duke Cassus had ordered for her, Ibelia asked the rider if he could take her to Courtney Street. But he replied that he couldn't, as the Duke had ordered him to take her to the Barnine estate. She explained that she had an errand to run, and he agreed on the condition that she keep it a secret. He dropped her at her location, and as she opened the door, she wondered if this was really the place she had intended to come to. She walked in and saw a man sitting. She knocked on the table and said she'd like a glass of Ascent and lemon ice. Ascent is a popular cocktail within the empire, but when you order it at this particular pub, it's different. Why? Because it's a code requesting an audience with the Ciro Guild. The bartender asked if she was sure that was what she wanted, and she smiled. Of course. If you knock on the table twice and ask for a glass of ice and lemon, that means you wish to meet the head of the Ciro Guild. 13 years from now, after Cassus' death, Lucius finds out the truth about his real parents. Feeling betrayed by Cassus, Lucius reaches out to the head of Ciro to gather information about him and ends up befriending the guild master. So, Ibelia chose to trust the guild for that reason, but the biggest reason she chose them is that, when it comes to information guilds, information is gold. And the information she has will be so juicy, Samuel won't be able to help himself. The bartender came back after confiding in his boss and told her to wait for a moment. He offered her a glass, asking her to have it while she waited. She smiled cheerfully, thanking him. Suddenly, something came to her mind about this bartender. There was something familiar about his scent. And you'd need to be insanely rich to get your hands on Rakara herb. It's famous for its calming aroma. Ibelia grabbed his wrist immediately, and he asked what the matter was. She chuckled, saying she saw no reason to wait for his boss because he was the boss. It's a pleasure to meet you, Samuel, head of the Ciro Guild, she greeted. He smiled and asked how she knew. Her lady had once told her that his sister was frail, so he was known to use Rakara herbs to calm her down. It became his signature sign. Ibelia smiled, adding that there was also a ring on his hand, an artifact that allows one to change their appearance. He smiled again, saying how interesting she was. He removed the ring from his finger, saying she seemed worthy of his time. The moment he took it off, he returned to his real form, short silver hair and golden eyes. He asked what her lady wanted from him. She tossed a bag of cash and said she'd like to sell her accessory for money. I want you to find a certain female physician on my behalf. She's a redhead with green eyes, living either in the capital or on its outskirts. Her name is Erin Launer, she said. According to the novel, Erin is a physician who develops a treatment that cures Samuel's younger sister. Samuel asked what he would get in return, and Ibelia tapped on the bag, saying it would be more than enough and that she hoped to continue doing business with the Ciro Guild. Ibelia also offered to tell him how to help his sister get better. Samuel was surprised, trying to confirm if he had heard her correctly. He told her how he'd been searching high and low since Arya was born 7 years ago, so what made her think she could find the cure? Well, the novel she found herself in is titled Arya of Light. That means Samuel's sister is the novel's main protagonist. She's frail but very warm-hearted. Lucius, who becomes jaded after the betrayal of Cassus and Ibelia, is moved by her gentle personality. The divine power that had been causing havoc on Arya's health turns out to be the very light that breaks Lucius free from the curse. Ibelia told Samuel to boil some talon flowers in water and have his sister drink it. They grow in the Celia kingdom and are known to provide strength. Samuel asked why he should believe her. She told him it was up to him to find out whether she was telling the truth or not. He said that unless he found proof, he couldn't give her the information she needed. She smiled, saying she knew that, of course, but finding the physician would benefit him too. Ibelia mumbled to herself that she'd be able to forge a deal with Samuel by finding Erin and helping her develop Arya's treatment. Samuel asked if that was all or if there was anything else she needed. She smiled, saying, "There's one more thing." Ibelia arrived at the Barnine estate at night. Upon entering her room, she exhaled in relief for not getting caught. Immediately, a knock came at the door. She was informed that it was dinner time. She got changed and went downstairs immediately for dinner. Upon arriving, the Count told her she was late. She took her seat, looking at him blankly, and thought to herself that his features were sharper than she expected. The Count noticed her gaze and asked why she was looking at him like that. She apologized, claiming she had just been thinking about something else. They began eating, and after a few minutes, the Duke was done. He wiped his mouth and called out to Ibelia, and she answered. He told her he had found out that she paid a visit to the Adelhard estate yesterday, then asked why she hadn't informed him about it. She dropped her knife and wondered how she was going to lie her way out of this situation. She sighed, then suddenly spoke the truth. I asked His Grace if we could break off the engagement, she said, leaving everyone in shock. Count Barnian asked coldly what she had just said, and she smiled, replying that she told him she didn't want to marry him and she had planned to bring the matter up with the Count as well. Immediately, her father stood from his seat and reached out to her, landing a harsh slap across her cheek. Poor Ibelia. Why didn't she lie her way out of the situation? She had just landed herself an unnecessary slap. She's too dumb. Do not test my patience, the Count said angrily. Before leaving, he told her he'd speak to His Grace and make sure the marriage happened exactly as scheduled. She should mark his words. Her stepbrother, Derek, asked if she had finally lost her mind. She rose from her seat, glanced at him, and asked if that was all he had to say to her. Derek looked confused and asked what else she expected him to say. She told him he was supposed to apologize or at least ask if she was all right. He laughed, then suddenly got irritated, saying she'd been acting weird lately and that she'd better shut up and go back to being quiet like she used to. She approached him and asked, "So, you're not sorry at all?" He replied, "Over my dead body would I apologize to you." Ibelia quietly sprinkled a liquid from a tiny bottle onto his foot, thinking to herself that she gave him a chance, but he threw it away. She bumped shoulders with him and left. Earlier, Ibelia had requested one more thing from Samuel, something that would make someone tumble down the stairs. Samuel had thought it was a mild request, but to her, making others suffer made her uncomfortable. That's why she wanted something subtle. So he gave her exactly what she asked for. Upon getting to her room, she mumbled to herself that the sooner she got out of here, the better. Back at the Adelhard estate, Cassus' assistant returned with feedback for His Grace. He reported how the Count seemed to dote on his daughter, but in reality, she was being neglected by her family. Even the Countess found ways to abuse her daughter. Sometimes, they found excuses to starve her in confinement. Cassus asked if there were any reports of physical abuse, but nothing of that nature was included in the findings. He mumbled to himself, if there's no physical abuse, then how did she get the bruise on her wrist? He rose from his seat and told his assistant he was going to the Barnine estate. His assistant asked if there was a reason for his visit, and Cassus replied that he needed to check something. Immediately, his carriage was arranged, and he left without notice. Sitting in the carriage with crossed legs, he thought to himself that he'd ask her lady where the bruises came from. Isn't this bad? Her lady presently has a bruise on her face. Would he find out about her abuse today? Cassus mumbled to himself, what if she turns out to be a victim of abuse? What then would I do next? He sighed, saying he couldn't believe he was heading there without even a solution. He had no idea what he was doing, but he couldn't just sit still. When the servants saw His Grace arrive, they panicked. The butler tried to convince him to leave, saying that her lady wasn't feeling well and that he should come back another time. Cassus wondered how someone he had just seen yesterday wasn't feeling well today. He didn't believe a word they said and demanded to see her lady right this instant. Her lady, sitting in front of the mirror in her room, looked sadly at the mess on her face. She sighed in relief, knowing that Derek got what he deserved. She had received news that morning that he fell down the stairs and broke his leg. She acted unaware, and Annie commented that she didn't know why everyone was suddenly falling down the stairs these days. Ibelia smiled, saying how unlucky they were, but deep down, she knew she wouldn't be seeing Derek for a while, and that made her feel much better. Still, wasn't this the clumsiest way to take revenge? She plopped onto her bed, using her bruised cheek as an excuse to get some proper sleep. Just then, a knock came at the door. She got irritated, wondering who it could be now. She got up and asked them to come in. It was Annie. You have a guest, Annie said nervously. Ibelia was surprised. A guest? Then she asked why Annie seemed so worked up over it. It's none other than His Grace. The Duke of Adelhart, she replied fearfully. Ibelia wondered why the Duke would visit without prior notice. She touched her cheek, asking herself could it be that he was here to break off the engagement? She knew she couldn't possibly meet him like this. Her lady asked Annie to go and tell the Duke that she wasn't feeling too well. Annie obeyed but returned shortly after, trembling, saying the Duke wasn't buying it. He insisted on seeing her and was waiting in the sitting room. Ibelia sighed in confusion, saying she had no choice but to go. She asked Annie to help her get ready. After applying all the makeup and doing her best, Annie had her lady dressed but she couldn't completely hide the scar. Well, she wasn't a makeup artist who could do miracles, right? Annie trembled more, thinking how disastrous it would be if His Grace saw his fiancée like this. Just the thought gave her chills. Ibelia then asked Annie to fetch her a hat. It would be a good way to cover everything up. At this point, I really believe Ibelia is dumb. Does she actually think she can meet the Duke with a hat on and hide her face from him? Ibelia wore a wide-brimmed hat that covered her head and half of her bruised face. She walked down the hallway and ran into the butler. He bowed and suggested she go back to her room. She told him His Grace was here to see her, and he replied that the Countess was already attending to him. Her lady was surprised that the Countess was meeting him on her behalf. What could she be trying to do? She smiled to herself and told the butler she had no intention of turning back. She couldn't possibly keep His Grace waiting. As she reached the sitting room, she paused at the door and overheard the Countess telling His Grace that Ibelia wasn't feeling well, and it would be best if he came another day. Ibelia mumbled to herself, so she's still trying to save face? What would she do if Ibelia barged in? Well, she didn't care. She walked in, fully prepared to ruin the distinguished Countess's reputation. The Countess shouted, saying she gave orders for no one to enter. But when she saw it was Ibelia, she was stunned. She clenched the fan in her hand, her fist shaking with fury. She knew she was doomed. Cassus asked why it took her so long to come out, and she apologized, saying she wasn't expecting any guests, thinking to herself that he really should have sent word before coming. He glanced at her, wondering why she was wearing a hat. He asked why she had one on indoors, and she didn't know what excuse to give. Cassus pulled the hat off her head, tossing it to the floor. Upon seeing her face, he asked if she was going to tell him again that she fell and hurt herself. The Countess quickly answered, saying she's just clumsy. But Cassus demanded to hear it from Ibelia herself. He asked again, did you fall and hurt yourself, or did someone do this to you? Ibelia wondered why he was going out of his way for her. Why was he getting angry on her behalf? He reached out and gently touched her face. It definitely looks like someone struck you, he said. Who did this to you? Who dares to raise a hand against my fiancé? He asked angrily. The Countess panicked and swore it wasn't her. Ibelia sadly spoke up and told him she wasn't slapped by anyone. Cassus was quiet for a moment, then finally said, I can't have you stay here any longer. I'll escort her to my estate. Ibelia was shocked. Before she could even say a word, he grabbed her hand and dragged her straight out of the mansion into his carriage. Seated inside the carriage, Ibelia angrily asked what he was trying to do. Reluctantly, he asked her the same thing. You're being abused by your family. So why did you ask to break off the engagement instead of asking for help? He asked. She sighed and told him again that her family affairs were none of his business. He asked if she was acting this way because she didn't want to marry him. She told him it was something like that. He responded confidently, once a fiancé, always a fiancé. I have no intention of breaking off our betrothal. He told her that as her fiancé, he had every right to look out for her. Ibelia yelled, asking why he would do that. He leaned in closer and replied with conviction, I told you before we're engaged. That means you're my person now. He's so sweet. But I think he's doing this because he grew up in an abusive home and couldn't even save his sister, so he'd feel like a failure if he didn't save Ibelia after noticing. Thank you for watching. Comment next to get updated.